In order to understand how we got here, it's really important to understand a bit of the history. So let's take a step back. Way back. So since the beginning of humanity, if you and I want to perform some sort of transaction, we've got to, I want to sell something, I want to swap something, I want to buy something. We've got two options. We've either got to trust each other. And that's okay if you're my mum. Like I say that because my mum is here. If you're my mum, or we're standing in front of each other, or we're dealing with small amounts. But in reality, for most things, we need a trusted intermediary, a person or an organisation who transacts on our behalf, so that because we don't trust each other. In eons gone by, that would have been a trusted elder within our village. These days, it's likely to be a bank, a bookmaker, a trade me, Uber, the government. These people are our trusted intermediaries. We trust them to transact on our behalf. That's the way it works. That's the way it's always worked. When computers and databases came along a few decades ago, what happened was that these organisations were able to scale to a global point. And that's the way it works. Well, actually, are there a few problems with that way it works? I would argue there are. The first one is that these intermediaries, they've got very big, they've got very powerful. Some of them have become these global mega organisations. They're obliterating competition. They're so powerful that governments have to bail them out if they get into trouble, and they can influence government policy. We're having an increased global disparity, a wealth disparity. The second problem, these intermediaries are run by typically a small group of powerful humans, and typically behind closed doors, these people can become corrupt. We saw this in the global financial crisis, and we know there are many countries around the world where corruption is rife. The third problem, whenever you create a centralized database around an organisation, these databases are targets for hackers. And some of you may have seen the news yesterday. You may want to change your LinkedIn password because somebody's probably got hold of your password. These organisations are targets. These databases are targets for hackers. And bear in mind that the majority of breaches, the hacks that we hear about, is probably a very small minority of what's actually going on. The fourth problem, privacy. Our privacy is being gradually eroded. Every time a transaction is done, it is recorded in somebody's database. A slice of your privacy gets taken away from you. The fifth problem, we're now living in a global village, a global marketplace. Where do you pay tax? Which law do you use? Which currency do you use? All the hassle with currency conversion. It's getting harder and harder, sillier and sillier. Governments are struggling to keep up. They're struggling to make sense of it. So, about 8 years ago, something quite fascinating happened. A mysterious person called Satoshi Nakamoto, well, it's either that or a guy called Craig from Australia, but I much prefer the Satoshi mysterious story. They released some source code and a white paper into the open source community. Pushed it out, he created a system to allow people to store and transfer value between untrusted people without a trusted intermediary. He called it Bitcoin. The world had never seen anything quite like this before. At the heart of his concept was this thing called a ledger. It was this ledger that recorded every transaction, a bit like a bank does, but his ledger, his database, was decentralized. It wasn't in one place, it was in lots of places, and it became known as the blockchain. The closest thing to the blockchain is something called BitTorrent, and BitTorrent you may have seen, you may have used in the past. So BitTorrent is a peer-to-peer system. BitTorrent is a peer-to-peer system to allow people to share files, copy files. The music and film industry would love to shut down BitTorrent, but they can't because there are no central servers to shut down. There's no corporation to sue. As long as there are nodes on the network, then it exists. So Satoshi applied that decentralized concept to a database. Every node on the network validates and replicates the database. And that is very smart and quite mind-bending. How can that happen? How can you create a database that replicates within minutes around the world? Well, it does. And the way the Bitcoin blockchain worked is every 10 minutes, all the transactions will get validated, and they get bunched up together. So every 10 minutes they get bunched up together, and they get cryptographically locked and added to the chain of blocks. And that chain of blocks, if you have the whole chain, you have a complete history of every transaction that ever happened since the Genesis block 8 years ago that Satoshi kicked off. So you have this chain of blocks cryptographically locked down. So the decentralized structure and this locking means that this database is immutable. It cannot be changed. It cannot be hacked, and you can't stop it. So if I give you a Bitcoin, I'm not giving you anything. I'm not transferring any sort of digital token to you. And it's very easy these days. If you have a smartphone and a wallet, like Bread Wallet or something, you can very easily hold up a QR code and give somebody a Bitcoin. It goes through pretty much instantly. If you do that, you're not giving them anything. All you're doing is both agreeing to update this database that you trust, that you both trust. So if you're doing that, you've got a system for transferring value without a trusted middleman, no bank involved. So where are we at with Bitcoin? It was an 8-year experiment. It's still going. It's been controversial. There's been huge fraud around the edges. So by the edges, I mean the exchanges. So in order to partake in the Bitcoin world, you need to get real money that you earn into it. You can mine it, but I won't go into that. But for most people, you need to get money into it. And the banks, for lots of good and bad reasons, haven't made it easy. They haven't wanted to go and touch this stuff. So what's happened is exchanges have popped up. These have been startups. These have been run by all sorts of dodgy people, and some of them, and they have created a service to allow you and me to convert money from dollars, pounds, yen into Bitcoin. So they have sprung up, and some of them have been hacked, some of them have been just corrupt, but they are centralized systems that allow people to get into the Bitcoin world. So, but once you're in, then there's been no hacking. It is never broken. The other problem is the open source community behind it have been a little bit of infighting around which direction it takes. That seems to be sort of getting better now, but there has been that. And just like any other anonymous or pseudo-anonymous currency, like cash, it is used for bad things. Drug dealing, buying bombs, whatever you like. That is happening. So that's one of the, so often that grabs the headlines. Its demise has been predicted many, many times by the mainstream press. There's probably about 20 big articles saying it's going to die, but it is still going strong. So this is the value of Bitcoin over the last 12 months. Up to a few days ago. So it's sitting at about $450 per Bitcoin. But bear in mind, the Bitcoin can be broken down into very small bits, so you don't need to transfer Bitcoins, you can transfer small bits. But the fundamental point about the Bitcoin experiment, it has proved itself as an unhackable, unstoppable system, a system of mutual trust. Another way to think of the way Bitcoin works is the concept of if I was to throw a piano out of, or if a piano was to land in a crowded street, crash down, we could record that fact. How would we find out, if I wasn't there, how would I find out the truth of what happened? How would I know what's happened? One way, the more traditional way on the right, is a journalist might report on the story. They might get their information from the hotel manager nearby. We could trust that source of truth. The other way is to grab all the people who witnessed it, grab them straight away, independently, separate them, and strap them down to lie detectors and get their stories, and then decide what most people said, agree on that is the truth. So that's kind of the concept behind Bitcoin, this distributed consensus-based system for working out what is the source of truth. So fundamentally, the Bitcoin experiment has worked. And really the next chapter in this story is the smart contract. So Bitcoin was fundamentally designed as a cryptocurrency, as a mechanism to store and exchange value. Soon after it arrived, though, people started to realize that you could not only store transaction information, i.e. the fact that I've given you a Bitcoin, onto this trusted network. You could also, in theory, store some instructions. So an example is if I want to transfer a Bitcoin from me to you, but I also want Jim and Bob to authorize that transaction. So it's only allowed if 2 other people authorize it. So a multi-signature transaction. I might add an extra rule to say I can only transfer my Bitcoin to you if these 2 people agree and it's between the hours of 9 and 10 on a Sunday night. So I can put in logic, I can put in business rules. And if you and I agree on those rules up front, and we agree to put those sets of rules on the blockchain as well, which we both trust, which cannot be hacked, which cannot be changed, it's locked, cryptographically locked into the system, then we have a smart contract and it can execute on its own and it can do stuff. So that's the idea behind a smart contract. The problem was that Bitcoin was never designed to do that. It was designed for a much simpler use case. It was designed just simply to allow people to transfer money, Bitcoins, around. It didn't by design have a language, a programming language that software developers like us could use to program the logic that a will or a bet or any complex financial transaction could actually be captured in that. So what happened was 2 or 3 years ago, a guy called Vitalik Buterin, a Canadian-Russian, decided that he was very much into the Bitcoin cryptocurrency world, and he decided he would solve that problem. He would start again. He would create a new blockchain from the ground up, using all the lessons learned, all the clever stuff from the Bitcoin blockchain, but build a system that allowed you to build smart contracts. So it wasn't a currency, it wasn't a cryptocurrency, it was a smart contract development platform. So he did this. He called it Ethereum. He crowdfunded 19 million a couple of years ago and found a whole bunch of people, including Taylor, who you'll hear from later. And they set about building this system. And this is when I first heard about it a year and a half ago. They were in the sort of early stages of building the system. It went live at the end of last year, remained pretty quiet. A lot of us in the sort of cryptocurrency world were watching it very carefully because the concepts were so exciting. But as with all these systems, they have to get the network effect to work. You have to have enough people, enough nodes in the network for it to be alive, to be trusted. And in January this year, it woke up. It's suddenly the number of people downloading the software went exponential, the number of nodes in the network, and it began to go a little bit crazy. This is, and Ether is the fuel of a smart contract. So when you put a smart contract, a set of business logic rules on the Ethereum blockchain, you have to gas it up with Ether. I didn't come up with that. So you gas it up with Ether, and so Ether it's kind of a cryptocurrency. It is a tradable currency. It has value. So you can think of it as an alternative to Bitcoin. This is a chart of the graph of Ether against the US dollar over the last few months. So you can see it went pretty quiet, and then February, March, it went up and up. Peaked at, so it was down sort of under $1 for quite some months, and then it went up to 15 US dollars. It then bounced back down again. In fact, in the last few days, I think we're up to 13. What are we up to now? 13. It's pretty volatile, but it suddenly became an attractive tradable commodity, and the exchanges started sort of trading in it. So, yeah.
Can you talk about how buying Ether, what that can do for you as a developer or as a user of the platform? Like how much or little should you invest?
Yeah, I'm not going to get into that. The sort of investing or gambling, I call it, on this is something that I've done a bit of it, and it's pretty scary stuff. And I wouldn't advise it unless you're happy to lose all of it, or if you lose, and also if you don't know what you're doing around private keys. It's still in the Bitcoin world. It's a bit more. It's a lot more mature. In the Ethereum world, it's less mature. But certainly, very happy to have some discussions, breakouts around that. That's the trading side of things. So the price went up, the number of nodes of the Ethereum network got to a point where the network essentially became secure. Ethereum officially moved out of beta, they call it the frontier release, into the homestead release in March. And I would argue for the first time in human history, we had a way to create complex transactions between untrusted parties without an intermediary. A bet, a will, a mortgage, a purchase, anything. In fact, if you think about it, a big chunk of our economy is based around these large organizations who do this stuff on our behalf, whose basically a lot of this stuff could be represented as auto-executing smart contracts. Even relatively new organizations, the new disruptors, eBay, Airbnb, Uber, these are intermediaries that could, in theory, be recreated as smart contracts. This is huge. This is, I believe, true disruption. So let's ready to finish up. Let's bring a real example. I want to sell my house. I want to auction my house off. This is a bit of code. This is Solidity, so the language, the most popular language for writing a smart contract. This is a snippet of it. Actually, there's probably about 15 more lines in this bit of script. You can download the Ethereum wallet and become a node, and you can paste this script in and run it. So I picked house auction as an example because it involves lots of intermediaries, some big money, lots of trust, and there's also some pretty dubious practices around phantom bidding and that sort of thing. So let's take that as an example of an auction in the future. So I'm selling my house. I might create, or I might work with somebody to create a simple smart contract or a complex smart contract, whatever the rules, and I imagine there'll be sort of templates to pull from a website. I might create those sets of rules, and I might then approach potential buyers and say, look, these are the rules, this is how I'm going to sell my house. Are you interested? So it's visible, it's transparent, it's in code. So anybody else can partake in that auction. So we agree on that. I paste the code, and again, you can do this, and we'll probably be running this as an example if we can get it running later on, so you can actually bid if you've got some ether and try and bid on my house. We put this bit of code on the Ethereum network, so we deploy it. So you press a button, you need to give it some ether. So for this contract, I think it's about 5 cents worth of ether I had to pay to execute this onto the blockchain. You wait about 10-15 seconds, it gets put onto a block. So in the Ethereum network, so the Bitcoin blockchain I mentioned takes 10 minutes for each block to go on. Ethereum's a bit quicker, it's about 13 seconds, and they're hoping to bring that right down. So each new block goes on every 13 seconds. And typically, just the way the maths work, you need to wait until one or two blocks are built on top of your block for it to be super secure. So after a few blocks, you're pretty certain that is unhackable. That's not going to be undone at any point. It's it's locked in. So I might do that with my smart contract. I wait a few seconds. It's on there. I can then share that contract, that agreement, with anybody who wants to bid on my house. I might email them some details of the link. They have their own clients, and they see a function that says bid. Okay, and they would then, if they wanted to, put a bid on my house. What they would do, they call the bid function, which is that one there, and it checks whether the auction hasn't finished, and it would, if their bid is the first bid or the highest bid, it would take their ether, and the contract would then own or have that ether. The money would come essentially out of their account onto the contract. And when you first look at this, it is quite mind-bending because who's got that money? Nobody. The contract has got that money. You can see the total. The contract owns that money, essentially. So the contract transfers from that bidder to the contract. Then a second bidder might go, I can outbid that. So it may be a hidden thing, or it may be an open, visible bid. So they can then put another bid, and the rules of the contract, if that bid is higher, the first bid will again get taken out of the contract, returned back to the first bidder, and the second bidder's money will disappear out of their accounts and appear in the contract's account, and that will go back and forth. When the auction ends, again according to the rules, the highest bidder, the contract, will then give the money to the beneficiary. Okay, so and that bidding are simply transactions that are being hard-coded. They're being cryptographically locked onto the Ethereum blockchain. They're immutable. They cannot be disputed. The rules are there. No intermediary, in theory. So I think that gives a good example of how these things might work in the future. So to come back full circle, as I started to mention the DAO, which went live, or went into its creation phase a few weeks ago. Could you create an organization that was made up of smart contracts interacting with each other on the blockchain? Well, this experiment has started, as I said. A whole lot of people seem to think it might work, to the tune of 145 million. Is this the beginning of a radical change in the way organisations are run? Is this the beginning? Is this Skynet? Are the computers about to take over? Or is this a world where power, control, wealth becomes more evenly distributed? Who knows? Thank you very much.